Welcome to Cancer Talks, a podcast sharing stories of personal transformation and collective healing from people who have been touched by cancer. My name is Cheryl Buck, and I will be guiding today's conversation. This is the final episode of 2022. We'll return in the new year on January 13th. My guest today is Jan Adrian. Many of you know Jan through our community workshops on Zoom, or maybe you had the pleasure of attending a Healing Journeys conference. Jan was our very first podcast guest, and now, more than 2 years later, we're continuing the conversation, touching in on how her own cancer journey has evolved and diving deeper into the story of how Healing Journeys came to be, as well as what it might look like to continue Jan's transformative work. It's Jan Adrian. Hi.
Hi, Cheryl.
For your second, your second podcast interview on Cancer Talks. And I look back, I think it was 2.5 years ago, almost 2.5 years ago, that we did our first podcast, and you were our first guest. And so I'm just really thrilled, and this is going to be the last interview that will be released in 2022. So I'm just so happy that it's you.
Thank you. And I'm happy it's me too. And I can't believe it was 2.5 years. It feels like about 3 or 4 months ago.
I know. Neither of us have gotten any older than 3 or 4 months.
No, we haven't.
So I just want to tell people that are listening that that first interview was, I've listened to it several times, and I love the whole story. You talk about your family and intuition. That was one of the great stories that you told. And this conversation that we're going to have today is really picking up where that interview left us 2.5 years ago, March of 2020. Mm-hmm. So I just wanted people to know that so they can go back to that first podcast interview and listen and hear even more things about you. So
thank you.
Well, so for people who don't know you, I just wanted to say a few things. I mean, this is really emotional for me. I just have to say that right off the bat. You know, I can call you and pretty much talk to you about anything. And when we decided to do this interview, we wondered, do we have enough to talk about? I think you said that. So we got on the phone and we started talking. And then 2 hours later, we stopped talking. And then you said, okay, I guess we do have enough to talk about. Having only known each other for 2.5 years.
And I want to say, Cheryl, can I talk in this part too?
Absolutely.
Okay. So there was a lot of synchronicity involved in our meeting, and I'm sure we'll talk about synchronicity. But I think you're the first person that I've ever felt was a real friend before I ever met you in person.
Oh.
Because we met at the beginning of the pandemic.
Yes.
On the telephone.
Yes.
And we lived far enough apart, and nobody was traveling. And so we had hours of phone conversations.
Oh, right. I see what you're saying.
And,
yes.
And we became best friends before we ever saw each other in person.
It's true. And then we met each other, just 2 or 3 months ago? It was summertime, I think. And and I mean, I just remember looking at you saying, oh my God, she is 3D. It says she's a real person. She's not just a two-dimensional being on Zoom. Yeah, right. I know. I feel exactly the same way. Well, so let me just say a few things about you. So for people who don't know you, that you founded the nonprofit called Healing Journeys. And Healing Journeys' vision is that everyone touched by cancer is empowered. And I don't know that I got the years right, but I think it was about 30 years ago. Is that right? That 3 decades or so ago?
We incorporated as a nonprofit in 1993.
I'll never forget then, because that's the year my son was born. So.
Oh my goodness.
Jack. Jan, you are one of the most committed people that I know. And I know a lot of people and a lot of people who are committed to things, but you are at the top of the haystack, if
Mm,
you will.
mm.
So healing journeys, the main thing, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but what I understand, the main thing that healing journeys offered during the almost 30 years, because I think you did conferences for 25 years, 25 of those 30 years. So conferences, and they were called Cancer as a Turning Point, Cancer as a Turning Point. And from what I understand, because unfortunately I never got to attend one, they stopped when the pandemic started, and that's basically when we met.
So the name was longer than that. The name of the conference was Cancer as a Turning Point from Surviving to Thriving.
Thank you for correcting that.
And when Healing Journeys started, I didn't realize that I was going to start a long-term thing.
Mm-hmm.
I was just doing one conference.
Yes. Yes,
So
that's right.
cancer,
Exactly.
cancer as a turning point from surviving to thriving. And we did that conference. And the feedback was so positive and spectacular that I felt like I had to do it again and again and again. And it just kept going like that. I
Yes.
mean, I never thought from the beginning, oh, this is a new career for me that will last 30 years. That never occurred to me until,
That's a good thing. It didn't occur to you.
yes,
You
right,
might have been put off by it. Yeah.
right.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to have you go through those conferences. That evolution was, I just found it spectacular. Also, I found it inspiring for me personally, and to just see what it took you and your team. It wasn't like that was, as you said, the first year, you weren't even sure that you were going to do another one. And then at the end, when I look and listen to you talk about everything that you did, it's just mind-boggling. And what I got from it is you did one at a time, and you
Yes.
made each one, the best that it could be. And I wish I had been able to attend them. I go on your website, I can see people that are in conferences, but unfortunately, I didn't know you in time. Oh, I also want to talk about your book. We can do that whenever you're ready. But would you just say the title of the book and any little thing that you want to say about it now?
So I've been using the pandemic time to write my memoir. The title of it is Coloring Outside the Lines. And then the subtitle is Surviving and Thriving with Cancer for Over 30 Years. And I didn't start out thinking I was going to write a memoir. I started out taking a storytelling class from Terry Tate. And we were in her living room. This was before the pandemic, in her living room telling stories. And as I was telling these stories, it occurred to me that all of these stories could be part of a memoir. And then I told the story of coloring outside the lines when I was 3 years old. And Terry said, "Oh, that should be the name of your book." So it just went on from there. And then the pandemic started, and then Terry did a memoir writing class on Zoom that I went to for 2 years, I think. And by the end of the 2 years, the memoir was mostly written.
Yeah, fascinating. I'm taking Terry's memoir writing class now. I've been through
Mm-hmm.
one class and I'm on the second one. So
Uh-huh.
yeah, I have a feeling that that's what happens
It is.
for me too, because
You
I'm
just keep writing stories, and all of a sudden you think, oh, there's 30 stories. That could be 30 chapters in a book,
exactly.
right?
Well, I look forward to reading it. And when is it? At what stage is it now? You finished writing?
I finished writing. We finished the first round of editing. We have a group of what they call beta readers reading it, giving us suggestions. We'll do one more round of editing and then publishing, and we're hoping that it will be out in March.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah,
Okay. Well, I can't wait to read it.
yeah.
I'm sure there are
Thank you.
things in there that I have not heard yet.
Absolutely.
Okay, good. So let's tell the story of how we met, because this is one that I didn't know this until just a few weeks ago. I knew how we met, but I didn't know what you were thinking when we met. So, and every time I think of what you said to yourself, I crack up. So I think it's time to share that with people.
So this is there have been so many synchronicities that have let me know that I'm on the right path.
Mhm.
And I think it was the synchronicity that somebody that I hardly know, but someone that attended several of my conferences, sent me a video that had you in it, and Zach Bush and Lynn Twist, and I think it was from the design meeting that you had,
The design shop. Yeah,
the
in
design
2000.
shops. So he sent that to me, in which you were talking about. It wasn't called Cancer Talks at that time. It was the
Mhm.
Cancer Story Project.
That's
And I
correct. Yeah.
was listening to it, and I was so excited that somebody was kind of taking on the mission that I had been doing. But I thought, doesn't she know about cancer as a turning point? Where has she been all this time? How could she have this mission and not even know that I've been doing this for 20 some years?
Have you figured out why? I have no idea. Didn't do my research.
Well, you know what? In the beginning, it's interesting when you just told me that Jack was born the
Mhm.
same year that I did my first conference.
Yes.
That means you were busy raising kids. I mean, you were a
Oh,
young
that's true.
mother.
That's true.
You weren't thinking
Yeah.
about cancer
Yeah,
then.
not that young, but yes.
Yeah,
No,
yeah.
not at all. Not at all. Yeah. I wonder what I
So
was doing. 1993, there wasn't even an internet, was there?
no,
1993? No.
no, there wasn't. Well, if there was, I didn't know about it.
Yeah, I didn't either. Yeah. Wow, that's a good point. So, and you say cancer is a turning point. We say cancer is an opportunity for personal transformation, and that's the same thing. Yeah,
Yes.
exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, well, now we know why. I didn't know about you.
Right. And thank God you're younger than I am, so you can carry this on.
Yeah,
Um,
okay.
I mean, it's kind of a lineage. When I first decided to do the conference Cancer as a Turning Point, and I had named it already in my head, but I hadn't done anything yet. And I was walking on the beach in Hawaii, and I saw somebody reading a book on the beach called Cancer as a Turning Point.
Wow.
And I thought, oh shit, that means I'm going to have to. So can I use that name?
Yeah.
Anyhow, that book was published in 1989 by Lawrence Lashan,
Right.
Cancer is a Turning Point. So I read the book and I loved it. And then I had another synchronicity where I got his permission to use that title. And he said later, he was so glad that somebody else was carrying on his work.
Oh, wow.
So he died, I think, just after his 100th birthday. Just last year. He just died last year.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
So I carried on his work, and now you're carrying on
Okay.
his work also.
I love that.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm double honored. Now that we can gather in groups, I'm wondering if we shouldn't do a Healing Journeys Cancer as a Turning Point work conference.
You know, I've thought about it a lot since I'm almost 81 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And I've thought about all the energy and the work that it took to do those conferences. And I don't have the bandwidth to do it anymore. But maybe you do, because you're younger and you have more energy than I do. But I'm
I would
tired.
definitely do it. You're tired. Okay. We'll
I'm
get
tired.
get a nice comfy chair for you, and and I'll do all the work. You're the brains, I'm the brawn.
The very last conference that we did was in 2018. And I had told you that I purposefully did not book anybody famous to speak at that conference.
Yes.
And the reason was because I didn't want it to be so big.
Yeah.
Because when we would usually have one well-known author as the speaker to be a draw. So our attendance in California would almost always be more than 1,000. We'd have 1,000 people.
Yeah.
And even in 2018, I didn't want to deal with the 50 volunteers and to serve lunch to 1,000 people. It's a lot of work to register and deal with 1,000 people. So we had nobody famous at that conference and just healing stories. And so we didn't have to rent such a large, expensive auditorium.
Mm-hmm.
We were keeping our costs down. So we only had 350 that came to that last conference.
Yeah, only.
Which
Okay.
only, I mean, it was small. It was really small compared to what we've
Relatively
done,
speaking. Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
but we could handle it. So when I think of doing it again, well, I don't know that people are ready to go out and be with others. So I don't think there would ever, for a while, there would never be 1,000 people that would gather together because too
Yeah.
many people are afraid
Yeah.
of doing that.
Still, that's true. Yeah, that's true. Okay, well, we'll put it on the back burner,
Okay.
but it's on the stove. Okay.
All right. Okay.
Well, okay, I know that you talked in the first time that we did this interview conversation about your personal cancer journey. Can you, if you could, do a little chronology and lead up to where you are now so people know, kind of get the whole picture of your cancer journey?
So it's 33 years.
Yes.
So I'm not going to go over every little detail.
Okay.
But it started in 1989 with breast cancer in the left breast, and there were lymph nodes involved. So it was stage 2 already. So then just going forward, over the last 30 years, I've had 3 primary cancers in the left breast, in the right breast, and in my eye, ocular melanoma. I've had at least 10 recurrences. I quit counting, so I don't know how many. It's been metastatic in my lungs since 2011. So 11 years metastatic. And I used to think, thank God it's not metastatic because it doesn't kill you unless it's metastatic. So that was a pretty scary thing when I got that word.
Yes.
But now I've lived for 11 years with metastatic cancer. So even that isn't so scary anymore.
Right.
Where I am now is that for the last 6 months, maybe, the cancer has been progressing in my lungs, and it's now also in my liver. And for the first time, I'm doing actually a Western medication. I'm on Ibrance. It doesn't seem to be working. My cancer marker numbers are still going up. So I've used a lot the radical remission strategies that Kelly Turner in her book Radical Remission talks about the 9 strategies that people that had spontaneous remissions used. And one of them is to have a strong reason for living. And I think my desire for living is not as strong as it used to be because of what's happening politically. I mean, there's so much division in our country, and then the pandemic, and then the mass shootings, and you can just name all the things that are happening in our world, and it's not as fun to be alive as it used to be. So I thought maybe my cancer's progressing because I don't have a strong enough will to live. And then I thought about young women I've known that had cancer when they had young babies, who had the strongest will to live that I could ever imagine. And some of them died.
Yeah.
And I've known other people who actually wanted to die. I had a friend, Robin, who just was ready, and it took forever. She'd wake up every morning and say, shit, I'm still here. Why am I not dying? So I realized that the will to live or not having a will to live is not going to make me live or die.
Yeah.
There's something much bigger in charge here than me. And I have to think that cancer is going to get me someday because I'm not going to live to be 1,000. So it has to happen someday.
But it might not be cancer, right? Could be something.
It could be something else.
Unrelated.
I don't know.
Yeah. Interesting.
But given my age, I'm thinking that it's not time for me to start a new career. I'm at a different place in my life now. So death might be on the table, and that's okay. Death is not a failure, and it's not something that we have to try to avoid.
Right.
It's just another transition. And that's helpful to me to think about it as another transition. And I was thinking recently, I remember when my son was born and I had a natural childbirth, I was at home, and it was not fun. It was painful. And I would think of all the women that had done this before me. And I thought, if all those women could do it, certainly I could do it too. Yes. And now I'm thinking that way about death. Another friend of mine died yesterday, I think. How many people have died? I mean, so many people have died. And if they can do it, I can do it too.
Wait, you were questioning about whether you'd be able to or not? Okay. Haven't heard that one before. Oh, boy. Well, I've had a question that I've wanted to ask you, and you can change the question to fit whatever answer you might have for this, but how does one remain calm after a cancer diagnosis? Or does one?
I have pretty much remained calm. I mean, because I've had so many recurrences, so it's like I've had 10 or 15 cancer diagnoses. And I would say my first reaction is always panic and fear and oh shit.
Mm-hmm.
And the longer I'm living, the shorter that reaction lasts. I mean, it could be a minute or two.
Mm-hmm.
But my basic attitude of life is that there's something bigger than me that I belong to, that I'm a part of,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm here for a purpose, and that I'm a spiritual being on a human path,
Mm-hmm.
rather than a human being who may or may not be on a spiritual path.
Yes.
So I think spirit always trumps matter, and everything that happens to me in this earth life is really to help grow my soul, to grow my spiritual self.
Mm-hmm.
So I now have the attitude that things don't happen to me, they happen for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So anything that happens, there's a silver lining in it somehow, or and I don't always understand it. I mean, when I was first diagnosed with cancer, I didn't know that was going to lead to a 30-year career that was so fulfilling.
Yes.
But I see all the gifts of cancer.
Mm-hmm.
And for somebody that's newly diagnosed, or for somebody who's just lost a loved one from cancer, that doesn't make any sense at all. I mean, that sounds totally counterproductive. And people who are in the midst of really awful treatments, they think, there's nothing good coming out of this. This is awful. And there are times when I have felt that way, that I didn't want to be there. But I think overall, when I can relax into it, and I have to say, one of my greatest teachers was an oncologist named Dwight McKee,
Mm-hmm.
and I can tell you a long story about who he is, but he's somebody that I totally trust, who is double boarded in hematology oncology and knows all the state-of-the-art treatments. He says that the most valuable thing anybody can do when they're diagnosed with cancer is to master stress reduction techniques. Because he says stress and fear are what kill you. Stress and fear put you in the sympathetic nervous response, and that's fight or flight. And healing happens in the parasympathetic response, which is rest and relax. And so he said, if you get a new diagnosis, there's really no rush in most cases to do any kind of treatment. But if you would spend the first month learning how to meditate and learning how to get into the parasympathetic state, that will probably be more useful to you than any kind of treatment you would take.
Fascinating.
So I think it is hard when you're afraid, when cancer brings up just fear, it is hard to be calm in the face of cancer.
Yes.
So just relaxing your body. He actually, I read an article by him last night in which he talked about a study they did with women with breast cancer, and with one group, they taught them a certain kind of relaxation where you tighten and then relax each muscle of your body. You go through it and you say, tighten your muscles in your hand, let them go. And they learned that progressive relaxation, and then the other group didn't. And that the group that learned the relaxation had a 40% less chance of recurrence than those who didn't.
Wow.
I mean, it was a bigger difference than any chemotherapy could make.
That's so interesting. When I got my cancer diagnosis in 2016, sitting across from the doctor that gave me the diagnosis, my very first thought was, I'm going to die. I could not believe that she was saying that. I never thought I'd get cancer. And I went into absolute sympathetic. Yeah, sympathetic.
Fight or flight.
Fight or flight.
Yes.
And I started sobbing, and then I drove home. I was just beside myself. And then I remembered that I had a plan. And that took me right out of sympathetic into parasympathetic.
Mhm.
And that's just fascinating. I didn't ever think about it that way.
Mhm.
What a great, I want to do some research and, write up something so we can share that with people about Dwight McKee and the mastering stress reduction
Mhm.
techniques, what they would be. It's brilliant. It's just brilliant.
Dr. McKee also talks a lot about intuition and
Oh, he does.
how important intuition is, because he says there is not one treatment that works for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes when you're newly diagnosed, 10 different friends can call you and say, you have to do this, you have to do that. And
Exactly.
you can't go to Mexico and go to Australia and go to Germany all at the same time. You have to choose. And just because a treatment has worked for another person doesn't mean it will work for you.
Exactly.
It's so individual.
Yeah.
So he said that you have to find a way of accessing and trusting your intuition.
Yes.
And that's not easy to do either,
No.
especially when you're afraid, because it's hard sometimes to tell if you're having a thought because of fear or because it's an intuition.
Yeah. How do you tell? Is there a way to tell, or you have to trust?
I have learned a way that works for me, but it doesn't mean it will work for other people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So when I was 16, and this, I think I told this story on the first interview, so I don't want to repeat it,
Mm-hmm.
but when I was 16 and I had an illness and medical doctors couldn't find out what was wrong with me,
Mm-hmm.
and my parents took me to a chiropractor, he used a pendulum
Mm-hmm.
to determine what I should and shouldn't eat and put me on a diet, and 6 months of his diet, and I was healthier than I had ever been.
Wow.
And I always wanted somebody to use a pendulum. It hadn't occurred to me yet that I could do it. I thought I wanted somebody that could do a pendulum like he did, and I never found another person. And maybe 20 years ago, I was in a gift store at a retreat center, and a pendulum fell off of the shelf onto the floor in front of me.
Oh. Did you take
I,
that as a sign?
I took that as a sign,
Okay,
and I
good.
bought that, and I bought that pendulum, and I still have it.
Oh my goodness.
The threads are frayed, it's about to break, but it still works.
Yeah. Wow.
So I use that pendulum almost every day. And I start out by asking it to show me a yes and to show me a no, because I've learned for different people that's different.
Mm.
And then I can ask it yes or no questions. So I'll say, is it the highest and best for me to eat oatmeal for breakfast?
Mm-hmm.
And it will say either yes or no.
Oh, what does it say?
It almost always says no.
Oh.
For years, I've been sensitive to grains. So if I ate oatmeal, I would have diarrhea.
Uh-huh.
So I haven't eaten it for maybe 10 years.
Oh my goodness.
And just this week, I was curious whether my body had gotten past that or not. So I asked my pendulum, is it highest and best for me to try oatmeal again? And it said yes.
Oh.
So yesterday morning, I had oatmeal for breakfast for the first time in 10 years.
Oh my gosh.
And 4 hours later, I had diarrhea.
Oh. Did you go back to the pendulum and say what's up?
I think the pendulum just wanted me to be reassured that I shouldn't eat it.
Oh, that's perfect.
Just one bout of diarrhea, and I learned that my body still doesn't want oatmeal.
That is too funny. Well, I'm sorry about that. I do love my oatmeal.
I did too. I loved it. I may eat it again
for the first
sometime.
4 hours. Yeah. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk a little bit about healing journeys and how did it come to be? You talk about it being an assignment. Can you talk about that?
I can. When I was diagnosed with cancer, I came from a background of, I had been teaching nurses seminars on mind-body health, and I have a master's degree in social work. So I have an interest in the mind and how the mind affects the body. That's always been really important to me. So when I was diagnosed with cancer, I wanted to deal with it as a whole person. All the treatments are just treatments of the body. It's like taking your car to a mechanic, and there was no spirit or emotions involved. And then I went to a conference that I was going to for continuing education, because I have my licensed clinical social work, and I have to do certain amount of continuing education. So I went to a conference down on the Queen Mary, and one of the speakers was Jean Shinoda-Bolen, and she was speaking about illness she was using the metaphor of mythology and illness as a descent into the underworld, and how illness is a disease of the soul. And I felt like she was speaking just to me. It was just exactly what I'd wanted to hear. And I was crying during her whole talk. And at the end, there was an immediate standing ovation. There were about 900 doctors, nurses, social workers, all health professionals there. And I thought, oh, everybody was resonating with this message. It wasn't just me. And then I thought, but the people who need to hear it are cancer patients, those of us on the front lines, not just the health professionals.
Yes.
So it felt like I was given the assignment right there to create an event similar to that for cancer patients.
The beginning.
So that was the beginning. It took maybe 2 years before the first conference actually happened. And Jean Shinoda-Bolen was a speaker at that first conference too.
Yeah.
But that's where the seed was planted, that it felt like I was handed an assignment.
Yes, you were.
And at that conference too that I went to, there were taiko drummers, and it was the first time I'd ever heard taiko drummers that were so powerful. And we wound up having a taiko drum group at every one of our conferences.
What is a taiko drummer? What is a taiko drum?
It's a big drum. They come from Japan. They have some really, really big, huge drums, and some little ones. But it's a particular way of drumming, and there's a group of people, 5 to 20 people, that all are drumming exactly the same, on the same beat. And some of the big drums, it's just so powerful to hit them. And it's interesting that when I first did the conference, I was doing it for women, because I just was feeling women needed it, and I advertised it as a women's conference. And then in the beginning, I only let women speak, so all the speakers were women. And I had to find a taiko drum group that was female, which is not so easy to do. But I found one in Sacramento. Tiffany Tamarabuchi was the leader of this taiko drum group, so I had them come.
Yeah.
So they came to the conference and drummed. And then at the end of their performance, they invited anybody on stage, anybody from the audience that wanted to try drumming, to come on stage and do it.
Yeah.
And that was so powerful for many women. I could see people up there banging the drum, and just, you could feel them get empowered as they were doing it. And that's actually how the conference started spreading, because I was doing it in California, and then this little, not even 5 foot tall woman named Rosemary. I didn't know this at the time, but Rosemary was from Seattle, and she was a volunteer for the American Cancer Society in Seattle. She came to a conference in Sacramento, and she was so empowered by playing the drums on stage that she went back to ACS in Seattle and said, I want this conference in Seattle.
Oh, wow. So
then ACS called me and said, will you come do it in Seattle? So that's how we got, so.
That was the second conference then, was the one in Seattle?
No, we had done 5 in California.
Oh, got it. Okay.
But that was the first time that we went out of California.
Right. Wow.
And then, there's a chapter in my book called How Did We Get to Greenville, South Carolina?
Yeah. Well, do tell.
And that happened because our conferences were recorded. Sounds True, which is quite a large recording company, recorded our conferences and created, at first it was audio tapes, and then they created CDs from the speakers from the conference. And those were sold in Barnes and Noble. And I mean, thousands of those were sold.
Wow.
And Robin, who lived in Greenville, South Carolina, bought those CDs from Barnes and Noble and listened to them and called me and said, what would it take to have a conference in Greenville?
Wow.
And I told her, if you're going to do this, it's going to be a lot of work and you have to be dedicated to make it happen there. So you have to come to a conference. So Robin and her husband Denvy flew to Seattle and went to a conference in Seattle, and then went back and created a steering committee in Greenville, South Carolina.
Yeah.
And I think we wound up doing 3 or 4 conferences in South Carolina.
Wow. That's fantastic.
Yeah. Robin wanted to become our East Coast, in charge of the East Coast Healing Journeys productions. And Robin died in 2008 from her cancer. But just based on the work she had already done, we also did a conference in Knoxville, Tennessee, and in Charlottesville, Virginia.
Wow, beautiful.
So each one just spread because of one person. I mean, it's really a story of how one person can make a difference.
Yes, it is. It really is.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
When I started doing it, I charged $200 and gave scholarships to anybody that asked. And after, in the first 2 years, I had done 5 conferences, all in California. And I was personally $35,000 in debt.
Right.
Because they couldn't pay for themselves. And then I had the counterintuitive idea to do it free and see what would happen. And got another nonprofit that was related to Stanford to co-sponsor it with us. So we got a Stanford facility free.
Stanford University in Palo Alto.
Stanford University in Palo Alto.
Yeah.
And that was in 1996. We did our first free conference at the Memorial Auditorium there, and 1,400 people came. And we asked
your intuition is still on course.
It was. And we asked for donations, and that was the first conference that paid for itself. But we didn't pay any speakers. All the speakers agreed to speak free. And most of them on the condition that I wouldn't ask them to do that again. So we didn't. Yeah, they spoke free. I didn't get paid anything, and the venue was free. So we had our only expenses really were marketing and the tech support. So the donations covered it, but that was not an ongoing business model because we couldn't ask speakers to not get paid. And I couldn't do what turned out to be a full-time job without getting paid, and we couldn't get venues donated. So we had to start raising money. But the board, our board of directors, decided then that we would always offer the conference at no charge because it had gone from an average attendance of 150 to 1,400 when it was free.
Yeah.
So they were always free from then on.
Yeah, fantastic. So you raised the money.
Yes, we raised the money.
Yeah. One of the conferences that you did at I think the Masonic Auditorium, and there was a woman who sang, Shana Noel. I love
Shana Noel.
Noel. Okay. It could be Noel, given the beauty of her voice.
Yes.
And someone that you knew walked in when she was singing. Will you tell that story? That's so beautiful.
Yes. Shana Noel had made a CD called Songs for the Inner Child. That is, I mean, speaking of getting into the parasympathetic state, that CD could really take you right there. It was so sweet and relaxing. And I had asked her to come sing at a conference, and she said, I don't sing in public. But she started sending us, before a conference, she would send us a box of 100 CDs. And she would say, you could sell these and keep the money to support Healing Journeys. So we had been doing that for a few years. But I kept talking to her, and eventually she said, okay, I'm ready. So she came and she sang in San Francisco at the Masonic Auditorium. And while she was singing, you could hear a pin drop in the room. And I remember thinking, this moment is what we do the conference for. everyone in this room is getting some level of healing. It's like music and humor reach the soul and somehow bypass the brain. And it was so healing. And my ex-husband and his wife, who live in Hawaii, were coming to have lunch with me that day. They were in San Francisco, and they walked into the auditorium while she was singing. And Simber, the wife of my ex-husband, can see spirits, which I don't see. But she said she walked in and the entire balcony was filled with spiritual beings that were there supporting the work that we were doing and that were very happy with what we were doing.
Wow.
So that image, even though I couldn't see them, that image was very comforting to me. Another confirmation that there's something larger than me that has given me this assignment, that I'm doing it for a purpose much bigger than I can understand.
Yes. Yeah. It's so beautiful. Actually, one of the things that I hadn't seen before on your website, on the front page of Healing Journeys website, is a video of Michael Lerner. And Michael Lerner is the founder, I guess, of Commonweal, which is a place where people with cancer and other diseases can go for healing. They offer healing programs. So anyway, he, in that little video, he talks about the distinction between curing and healing.
Right.
Would you talk about that a little bit? And what's the difference between curing and healing?
I have in my book, and I wonder if I can find it easily. I know where it is. I read someplace a really good distinction between healing and curing. Curing is something that is attempted from the outside in. So it's something somebody does to you.
Yes.
Healing happens from the inside out. And curing it's a physical thing, and healing is the whole person, mind, body, spirit.
Yes.
Healing involves all levels of the person.
Yes.
There are some people that say even a death can be a healing thing, that the spirit can heal through the death process.
Yes.
And you can have a cure of a disease without healing.
Yeah, that really speaks to why Healing Journeys is called Healing Journeys and not Curing Journeys.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
We never talked about cures or treatments necessarily, because in our culture there's such an interest in finding a cure for cancer.
Yes.
And that totally bypasses the suggestion that cancer may have a message for us.
Yes.
Maybe it's here for a purpose. There are even some people who say cancer is not a disease. Cancer is a response to the toxic soup that we live in. And the message of cancer is that we're living in a toxic soup. Dina Metzger wrote years ago that she thought that cancer was the Earth's last attempt to try to get our attention, to let us know that we are destroying life by what we have done to the Earth.
Yeah.
That we don't have clean water, we don't have clean air, we don't have clean food. We've really put toxins into everything. And not only can we not live that way, but the Earth can't live that way. But the Earth itself is struggling. So cancer, if cancer is a message and we can learn the message, we can heal the disease that is causing cancer.
Yeah, exactly. You know, he also, Michael Lerner of Commonweal, he talked about, I thought this was really interesting, that people say keep a positive attitude when you have cancer. And he said that's actually a toxic idea to ask people to do that, which, you know, I had never thought about it that way. And that it's healthier to allow yourself to feel all the feelings that you're having, the anxiety, the depression, the grieving, whatever you're experiencing. It's better to do that and then find, as he said, positive ways to live in relationship with all of those feelings.
And going back to radical remission and the 9 strategies that Kelly Turner talked about, one of those is to feel and express negative emotions.
Yes,
That's
right.
In order to get through them, if we just try to pretend they're not there, they will come out in other ways. But if we let ourselves really feel it and we express it, we can let it go and we can go to the other side of it.
Yeah.
I recently read a book by Francis Weller, who I know leads groups at Commonweal with Michael Lerner. And he talks about the deeper side of grief, and he does grief rituals where he says you really need to experience grief in community, that you can't fully experience and let go of it by yourself, that it really needs to be a community event. And he has these weekend retreats where people just wail and really express their grief all together. And he talks about what a healing experience that is. I've been looking at where he does that because I'd love to go to one of those too.
Yes. Wow. Well, I feel like we've come full circle. And at the very beginning of our talk today, you mentioned the design shop that we did in 2019, fall of 2019. And Dr. Zach Bush was in attendance at that. And he said isolation is the meta disease. And so you just talked about that, that healing happens in community. Health happens in community.
And when you think about that in terms of our response to the pandemic in the last 2 years,
the opposite. We did the opposite.
We've done the opposite. We've forced people to be isolated.
My gosh. Oh.
We were going for a cure to try to get rid of a virus.
Yes.
But we did the opposite of healing. It was not healing to force us to be alone.
Yeah.
It's been a pleasure, and it's like one subject brings up another, and we could go on and on forever.
Hence the 2-hour conversation.
Right. And it's been an interesting experience for me to write a memoir about my cancer experience, because it's made me think much more about what's the meaning of cancer and what have I learned from it. People talk about transformation, cancer as a transformational process, but then how do we transform? Like what does that look like? And it's helped me develop a much broader view of life. I think when we think of ourselves just as a body, it's a very narrow view of life, and cancer can only be a curse if we're only bodies.
Yes.
Because there's nothing to learn from it. But when you look at it in the broader sense of how it is a message for the earth, and how it's developing our spirit, and how it's helping me grow spiritually, then you can see it as a transformational process.
I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Jan Adrian. It would mean a lot to us if you would take a few minutes and leave a review in your podcast app. If you're wondering how you can support this work, you can make an end-of-year donation, for which we would be very grateful. Cancer Talks is a platform for anyone who has been touched by cancer. Write to us at info@cancertalks.com if you have a story to share. See you in the new year.